Hi everyone. As most of us have not met each other ever, so I was thinking starting with, I think I have to shout so everyone hears. So we have never met, so I'm going to tell a little bit about me, and starting with that. And I'm a web developer person, so been developing stuff for the internet for a while, and I actually got dragged into this back in the day using Perl, which is I think Perl was mentioned already today. And at that time it was called home pages, and I guess it was like used for collecting data from an HTML form or something like that. But I started my paid career not in the web. I started with C, C++, Windows application back in Windows Vista time. Yes, we don't really want to remember those. Then I got dragged back to the internet again through like .NET and C#, which was kind of Microsoft related, which kind of makes sense in that setup. And at that point, I also got introduced to this thing called open source. I of course knew what it was, but I actually got involved. I'm a bit embarrassed to say what the first thing I contributed was to, but I might as well, because it's quite funny. And it was a jQuery plugin, multi-select plugin. And also, to my surprise, we think talking about Ruby is dead, and jQuery, there's a new version coming, version 4. It's amazing. It's amazing. And things changed quite much at some point when I got dragged into the Ruby world, and this was at the time Rails 4 point something was the coolest hot. And from there, it kind of continued to where I'm now. And I might, now we talk about dependencies, so if you're dealing with Rails projects, you might have a dependency to me in some way, as being the maintainer of the Ruby JWT gem. And dependencies is something we're going to talk about today. And I was thinking, starting just asking, what do you think? Let's see if we can get some interaction going. So what do you think when you hear the word dependencies? That's a good one. That's a good one. Any more? Coffee. I'm very dependent on coffee. There's many dependencies. Humans need food. If you have a lot of dependencies, you will have hell in some cases. There was, when you're thinking about the DLL word and Windows, which I talked about this a moment ago, DLL hell was a thing. That was totally just because of dependencies. But we're not going to talk about how dependent we're on coffee, the first cup of coffee in the morning to be productive. Today we're going to talk about dependencies in software, so maybe the thing that hell refers to. So I'm going to be talking about a service, and from the point of view of dependencies. And the main character in this story is a service that's on the internet. It has UI, it has APIs, it serves a purpose, it solves a problem. It has been along with us for a long time. The problem it solves, it's a business-to-business thing, enabling businesses to do transactions with each other. That's maybe not that important. This will be a bit of Ruby, a bit of Rails, but I guess you could kind of switch this service and languages to any framework out there. So some battles won and some lost, and some are still healing, and some are probably still bleeding that we don't know of. And let's say that this is based on a true story. There has been maybe some coloring pen. There might be facts that's not true. But let's get to it. So, in the early days, the service we're talking about was built on Ruby 1.8 and Rails 2.0. That was a very long time ago. And in the beginning of this service, features were added. It grew into something big and valuable for somebody because it like kind of stuck with people. And even during these early days, some of these dependencies were updated. So for example, an update from Rails 2 point something to Rails 2.3 happened. And one day, in the early days, this service was acquired by a big corporation, which was kind of a turning point in the story, I guess. And now, with a lot of new expectations, like new owners, the company buying it probably thought they were buying the best of the best, the greatest tech in the world. So this is going to solve all the problems we have. There were a lot of new expectations, new stakeholders. Team was growing, new people coming in, expecting to be working with something modern and great. But we have a service running Ruby 1.8 and Rails 2.3. What a disappointment. So in this kind of pressure and like the need of new services and the developers being happy, and also the time of microservices, like it was pretty easy to justify that, like, let's build things into separate things and not into our service that like the big Rails application that we were having. Let's just build microservices, because then developers can have new and fancy tools, new Ruby versions and all that. I will not go that much into details about like these decisions during the time and going into these kind of different paths, but let's say that a few bad decisions were made back in those days. Oops. So the thing was not like old Ruby version and old Rails version and like a lot like new services were happening, but the cracks are like the problem is still there. The big monolith that powers like was the valuable thing was still there, giving like having its purpose, having its features. The features needed like bug fixes and some extensions, of course. So people still needed to go back to this old unpleasant thing and do things with it, because the core was still there. So daily developer activities, as like running tests locally, was a thing. You needed to run Ruby 2.3 and Rails 2.3 and Ruby 1.8.7 on local machines, and that was like a pain, of course, when time moved on. And one of the like recurring problems on these kind of versions we're talking about was like SSL TLS. TLS on 1.8.7 was a nightmare. It's a ticking time bomb. I remember times when integrations to external services just broke because of like some random SSL, like an error you got from the open SSL library in use, which was like, what's going on? And there was one particular case when this happened, and in that case we were super lucky, because we're not going to go and update Ruby like that, because a third-party dependency, like a third-party service integration breaks. The service in hand were actually running on Azure, and Azure had this like alternative URL that you could use with a different certificate that Ruby 1.8.7 supported. So we of course just lose that loophole to move forward, and then problem solved, moving to the next feature to build. And like imagine like OS X updates, like Mac OS nowadays. That was like a nightmare to manage. And I dug up this old picture from instructions back then that like more OS X version didn't fit into this picture, but so we were like desperate. Like this thing was not sustainable, so let's just abandon it, I guess. And this was not actually the only thing that we were struggling with at the time. We were still successful. We were like, to the outside, we were looking great. Like, we did features, we had like request millions and like growing like crazy, but we had cracks all over the place. So like old Rails version, not the only problem, like database had problems, load balancer needed attention, all kind of stuff. And we had this document that was named Scale or Die, which was the kind of holy grail to things that what are the things we're gonna do or need to do to be able to survive. And and it had all of these things, like we need to get the new database and all that kind of stuff. But one of the things that, like when looking back at this document, one of the things that it said was that let's not build new features, no new code into the old Ruby code base. And that was kind of an indication of us giving up hope on this thing. Like, there's no hope. It's impossible to do anything with this thing anymore. And even one bullet in that document said that we need more microservices, whatever that meant. But of course, like giving up, not adding new stuff to the thing, like moneymaker, that really doesn't work. So, and rewrites very seldomly work. So we kind of realized pretty quickly that our goal of not adding new stuff into the old thing, that really, like, it wasn't practically possible. So we continued the grind. I guess the list of OS X versions just grew, and like instructions how to get this old Ruby version working on local machines, just like we somehow struggled forward. But there was a bit of glimpse of hope. Of course, like, we were not running on the vanilla Rails 2.3 version because like it's like a Swiss cheese when it comes to security issues. We were running this Rails LTS version, which like a bunch of great German people is maintaining. So and they were like doing stuff with it. They were like, they mentioned and claimed that you can run this thing on Ruby 2 point something, which was cool and hot at the time. We were like, damn, if they can do it, why can't we? And that was kind of the first step towards a better future for us, I guess. And the first milestone was to get the thing running on Ruby 2.3. And somehow, without going into the details, we did it. It was a myth back then that it's impossible because of encoding changes in Ruby. Like, people died trying, but somehow we made it happen. The impossible problems were somehow tackled. Probably not everyone in the most elegant way, but still, problem solved. And we continued this grind pretty happily until Ruby 2.7, updating Ruby versions. But still, running this Rails 2.3 application on Ruby 2.7, and not to talk about the other dependencies that's in the mix of this. So it wasn't really sustainable. And at some point, we had to kind of put the cat on the table and do something about Rails 2.3. Like, you can't run Rails 2.3 in 2023, even if they kind of match, but it's not a great fit, right? And in 2023, we sat down and we had this big thing called, like, a planned slot that what we called Rails upgrade, and it needed to happen. We had really no idea what it really meant, but there was like time reserved, and somehow we made it happen. We sat down, closed the door, and 3 months later we came out with like Rails 7. What the details of that grind was, I think it's too early to talk about. We are still like bleeding in some places, I guess. But we're done, right? Not really. Like this time span is years. And during the years of neglect, we had created all kind of stuff. And all of a sudden, all the services and things we created during the years were older than our oldest application, which, like, that felt bad. Also, I have to mention that not all of these services that we created during the years were because of like bad decisions, because of like what the lost hope and all that. Some of them made sense. So not everything was not great. And also, one of the problems that we had was that upgrades in general was an activity of random people with interest. So some people were eagerly updating what they felt to be their like own. They had maybe been part of creating it, which made them care about it, and they did something about it. But not all of these services like had that kind of privilege, and not all people were really interested or had the knowledge to do it. And also, running Ruby 1.8.7 for such a long time kind of made you paranoid in upgrades, because it was never trivial to update anything with such a long, like, old runtimes. So the idea of ownership kind of grew on us. Like, how do we tackle this problem of like having a great ship that's super and then a lot of small sailboats that are leaking? And all of these services we had were distributed to our team, the different teams, which at the time were like 3 product teams responsible of different business problems and areas. And of course, splitting something based on like where the split was based on technical abilities and not business problem is a bit hard. So sometimes the split was done that it solved a particular problem that the product team was responsible of, or then it was just a random pick that you take this one because you're unlucky. And for starters, this responsibility was a small thing. It was keeping dependencies secure, which means that the teams were responsible of reacting on security issues that one of our security issue scanner tool was flagging. And being a part of big corporation, there was a lot of tools doing that. After this seed of ownership had been kind of planted, we continued with that. So we had measured the security issues and having a lot of like tooling to that in the whole company, like provided by our great corporation, where we are forced to use tooling, being all over the place. We had created this kind of dashboard thing for us that collected all the valuable data for us in one place and showed it in a very easy way. So if you got a security issue, there will be a red bubble, and red bubbles mean bad things and you need to act on it. So we had kind of something that showed the kind of state of something for the teams that were responsible. But how to measure dependency freshness? Like security like issues are easy. You either have one or you don't. And you don't want to have them. So you act on them and get the number now to 0 again. But dependency freshness, that's a bit harder, because like you can of course talk about like we are 2 major versions behind a certain dependency. But that doesn't, like, you could be 2 major versions behind because of like there's a lot of actions happening with that dependency, or the release cycle is very fast, so it's just a lot of stuff happening there. So it doesn't sound that bad to be 2 versions behind, but being 2 Rails versions behind already, that's already starting to be a problem. So the concept of something called lib years was introduced to us somehow. Lib years is a way to kind of measure how old the dependency you are using compared to the latest release version out there. So then talking about dependencies become a bit more human friendly. So saying that our application is 100 years old is way more efficient to talk about that, yeah, we're 3 Rails versions behind. So we have something to measure, a number, like the age of the dependencies. And together with what we had, something where we collect all the summary of the state of our applications and this new measure, and combining these, we had a pretty powerful way to communicate the state of the dependencies. So now when we have a measure, we can start using that measure. So we came up with a promise that all our dependencies, all our Ruby versions should be on the latest patch version of Ruby, and with a lib year of maximum 20 years with no open security issues. And this was a promise that we agreed on as the teams responsible of the services were. And we're still having this as a goal and not as the fact today, but this is a goal that everyone is committed on aiming against. And did we as a team learn anything of this journey? I think that dependencies are valuable but risky. Like without dependencies, without Rails, this service would be nothing. But at some point, the dependencies will turn on you, become a risk, become something that wants to slow you down if you don't care about them. Losing hope is not a good reason to do really anything, just a feeling. So splitting into microservices because of lost hope is probably not a good enough reason to do it. Making these promises and goals visible motivates people, motivates team to achieve a common goal. And I hope that none of you need to deal with Ruby Rails 2.3 ever again. Thank you.